Welcome to the Lore Weaver podcast, where we explore fantasy, history, world building, and the stories that shape our imaginations. Here we dive deep from A Song of Ice and Fire analysis, to book reviews, to real historical parallels behind your favorite worlds. If you enjoy thoughtful takes, close readings, and long form discussion, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode. George R.R. Martin's recent interview with The Hollywood Reporter has reignited familiar debates about the ending of A Song of Ice and Fire, particularly around Tyrion, Sansa, and how closely the books will align with the show. But the irony of the renewed uproar is that very little of what Martin revealed is actually new. Most of it is simply a reaffirmation of positions he has been stating in one form or another for decades, and a position the books themselves have supported all along. This is especially true when it comes to the idea that the book ending will diverge sharply from Game of Thrones. Martin has been explicit about this for years, in interviews and on his blog, and once again, he is reiterating that same thing. The book's ending is going to be significantly different. Some characters who are alive in my books are going to be dead in the show, and vice versa. None of this should be a surprise. If anything, it reconfirms what readers have always known. The show canon and the book canon split long ago. I would argue that they split the very second the very first episode aired. They are telling fundamentally different stories. The only genuinely surprising element of the interview for me was Martin's offhanded reference to writing a Jon Snow chapter for The Winds of Winter. Everything else neatly aligns with the trajectory that he has been signaling for over 30 years, I believe. So let's start with Tyrion. In the Hollywood Reporter interview, Martin said this about Tyrion: "They made it more of a happy ending. I don't see a happy ending for Tyrion. His whole arc has been tragic from the first. For many viewers, this sounds shocking, but for readers of the books, it shouldn't. Tyrion in Game of Thrones is not Tyrion in A Song of Ice and Fire. The show fundamentally rewrote him, and Peter Dinklage demanded that additional changes be made to further whitewash him. So the show version of Tyrion is softened, moralized, and ultimately rewarded. The books never do that. Book Tyrion has sympathetic qualities, yes. He is clever, funny, and capable of empathy, but he also commits objectively horrific acts, including SA, murder, complicity in mass atrocities, and the exploitation of the powerless. These are not late series corruptions. They are present from early on. While serving as Hand of the King, Tyrion actively works to keep Joffrey in power. He refuses to send Sansa home to her mother, instead keeping her as a hostage, just as Cersei did. He blocks Stannis from taking the Iron Throne, while fully aware that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen are Jaime's children, not Robert's. While one could argue that he was trying to protect his niece and nephews, that does not absolve him of complicity. Without Tyrion's political skill, Joffrey's reign and his atrocities would not have lasted as long as they did. More importantly, Tyrion is often disturbingly callous about violence inflicted on the powerless. And again, this isn't something that happens after his darkest turns. It's present very early on. For instance, this scene from A Clash of Kings. A lordling down from the Trident says your father's men burned his keep, essayed his wife, and killed his peasants. And Tyrion's response to that? I believe they call that war. To Tyrion, SA and mass murder are simply features of warfare, not moral crises. Later in A Dance with Dragons, his worldview becomes even clearer when he criticizes Daenerys for being too lenient during the siege of Meereen. She should have poisoned every well. That was what his lord father would have done, Tyrion did not doubt. This is crucial. Tyrion idolizes Tywin Lannister, a war criminal who rules through terror, SA, and collective punishment. Tyrion doesn't just inherit Tywin's intelligence, he inherits his ethics. And when Tyrion murders him, George R.R. Martin makes that explicitly clear when he says that he is Tywin writ small. That context matters when we talk about Tyrion and SA, especially in his treatment of Sansa Stark and multiple sex workers. Tyrion's abuse of Sansa, who is 12 years old at the time, is frequently minimized or excused by readers. The usual defense is historical relativism. Child marriages happened in the past, therefore Tyrion's behavior is somehow acceptable or neutral. But A Song of Ice and Fire is not a medieval chronicle written in the Middle Ages. It is a modern work written by a modern author who makes it abundantly clear that Tyrion knows what he is doing is wrong. This passage is from his and Sansa's wedding night, after he has the 12-year-old strip for him. "You're a child," he said. She covered her breast with her hands. "I've flowered." "A child," he repeated. "But I want you. Does that frighten you, Sansa?" "Yes." The text does not allow ambiguity here. Tyrion explicitly acknowledges that Sansa is a child and desires her anyway. That is the author telling us that there's something wrong with Tyrion. He forces her to undress in front of him. He undresses himself in front of her without her consent. He touches her body knowing she is terrified. The scene makes Sansa's fear explicit, and Tyrion's internal conflict does not absolve him of his actions. Many readers focus on the fact that he ultimately refuses to consummate the marriage, and conclude that that makes him good. It doesn't. Tyrion had power long before this moment. During a clash of kings when he served as Hand, he could have sent Sansa home to Catelyn. Instead, he keeps her imprisoned and later participated in the plan to forcefully marry her into House Lannister so they could seize Winterfell through her claim. Even when he offers to let her marry his cousin instead of him, that's not an act of kindness. Sansa would still be forced into a marriage she did not want to an enemy who was going to claim her family's lands. The refusal to consummate the marriage is not moral heroism. He makes it clear that he wants to consummate the marriage, but he wants to do it when the 12-year-old child wants him as well. Once she wants him, then he'll be comfortable consummating the marriage. "My lady," Tyrion said, "you are lovely, make no mistake, but I cannot do this. My father be damned. We will wait. The turn of a moon, a year, a season, however long it takes, until you come to know me better and perhaps trust me a little." This refusal to consummate isn't because Tyrion wants to do the right thing. It's because he wants a child to be sexually interested in him before he uses her. And Martin has never been subtle about how we are meant to understand Tyrion. As early as 1999, he said, "I've got to admit, I like Tyrion Lannister. He's the villain, of course, but hey, there's nothing like a good villain." In 2000, he described Tyrion as the grayest of the gray, a character who operates on the wrong side, even when readers sympathize with him. Tyrion's wit and intelligence were never intended to morally absolve him. They were meant to make him compelling, not righteous. So when Martin now says he doesn't see a happy ending for Tyrion, that isn't a change of heart. It's reaffirmation. The show version of Tyrion, whitewashed, morally centered, and rewarded with political power, was a deviation. The books have consistently framed Tyrion as someone who survives not because he is good, but because he is useful, dangerous, and willing to be ruthless. A tragic ending does not require Tyrion's death, it only requires consequences, and the books have always been moving in that direction. Now let's talk about Sansa Stark. In the same Hollywood Reporter interview, Martin said this: "I was going to have Sansa die, but she's been so appealing on the show, maybe I'll let her live." That statement caused outrage in some corners of the fandom, but once again, it shouldn't have. Sansa dying makes complete sense within the logic of the books. Sansa's POV never followed a classic protagonist arc. Unlike Jon, Arya, Bran, or Daenerys, Sansa functions primarily as an observational lens. First, she is a window into King's Landing politics. Later, she becomes a window into the Vale. Her chapters are about what she witnesses far more than what she meaningfully shapes. That's not an accident. Martin has been unusually candid about why Sansa exists at all. Arya was one of the first characters he created. Sansa was invented later, deliberately, as her opposite, because too many Stark family members were getting along. Sansa was designed to introduce internal family conflict and to provide contrast to Arya. She represents the ideal Westerosi lady, defined by courtesy, obedience, and romantic fantasy, in order to highlight what society considers Arya's deficiencies. In that role, Sansa frequently belittles Arya, bullying her and damaging her self-image. This dynamic isn't harmless characterization, it has consequences. Sansa's first major betrayal comes after Joffrey attacks Mycah and attempts to murder Arya with a steel sword, while Sansa watches. Rather than telling the truth when questioned by King Robert, despite having already told Ned what happened, Sansa claims she cannot remember. That lie directly results in the death of her direwolf lady. The direwolves are not decorative symbols in this story, they are magically significant extensions of the Stark children themselves. Even Ned wonders what Lady's death might mean for Sansa. "Your children were meant to have these pups, my lord, and he had killed Sansa's. And for what? Was it guilt he was feeling, or fear? If the gods had sent these wolves, what folly had he done?" It's also worth noting that later, Sansa dreams of Lady multiple times. Sansa sat up. "Lady," she whispered. For a moment it was as if her dire wolf was there in the room, looking at her with those golden eyes, sad and knowing. She had been dreaming, she realized. Lady was with her, and they were running together. And trying to remember was like trying to catch the rain with her fingers. The dream faded, and Lady was dead again. Later in A Clash of Kings, while Sansa is fearing her own death, she also connects that to Lady. Sansa backed away from the window, retreating toward the safety of her bed. "I'll go to sleep," she told herself, "and when I wake, it will be a new day, and the sky will be blue again. The fighting will be done, and someone will tell me whether I'm to live or die." "Lady," she whimpered softly, wondering if she would meet her wolf again when she was dead. While that's not ironclad foreshadowing, it's pretty interesting that her wolf and her death are linked multiple times. The importance of the direwolves to the Stark children is emphasized repeatedly. The wolves are a part of the children, and part of Sansa is already dead. Sansa's second betrayal is far more consequential. She goes to Cersei and reveals Ned's plans to remove Sansa, Arya, and the Stark household from King's Landing. In doing so, she provides herself as a hostage. The information she provides Cersei also enables her to time her coup. The result is catastrophic. Stark guards and servants are murdered. Arya is left destitute and hunted in the streets, and Sansa herself becomes leverage used to force Ned into a false confession and eventual execution. This is not a retcon or an overreading. It aligns directly with Martin's original 1993 outline, in which Sansa chooses her husband and child over her family, a choice she later bitterly regrets. While the details change, the core function did not. Sansa aligns herself with the Lannisters twice in A Game of Thrones, and both times the consequences are devastating for her and for the Stark family. Martin addressed this directly in a 1999 correspondence with a fan. "No single person is to blame for Ned's downfall. Sansa played a role, certainly, but it would be unfair to put all the blame on her. But it would also be unfair to exonerate her. She was not privy to all of Ned's plans regarding Stannis, the Gold Cloaks, etc., but she knew more than just that her father planned to spirit her and Arya away from King's Landing. She knew when they were to leave, on what ship, how many men would be in their escort, who would have the command, where Arya was that morning, etc., all of which was useful to Cersei in planning and timing her move. Sansa is not evil. She is not malicious in the way that characters like Cersei, Ramsay, and Littlefinger are, but she is a bully, selfish, classist, misogynistic, and deeply invested in proximity to power. She prioritizes what she wants and assumes it will work out, until it doesn't. That betrayal becomes even more disturbing when she actively throws Arya under the bus while being manipulated by Cersei. "I am not like Arya. She has the traitor's blood, not me." Again, this is not a character arc about empowerment. It's a portrait of someone whose choices consistently harm others while she remains largely unaware of the broader consequences. Sansa's eventual marginalization is foreshadowed early on. After Ned's arrest, she observes the court and notes, "It was as if she had become a ghost, dead before her time." Martin could have described her as ignored or shunned. Instead, he chose language associated with death. The phrasing matters. After A Game of Thrones, Sansa's role becomes increasingly passive. She observes, she misinterprets, she follows orders and fits into the plans of others. She slowly, painfully gains a surface-level insight, but she never becomes the driver of events. Once she ceases to be useful as a political camera, her narrative utility diminishes sharply. From a structural standpoint, killing her would not derail the story, it would reinforce it. This is precisely why the show made the changes that they did. In 2015, David Benioff admitted that Sansa was given Jane Poole's storyline. "We really wanted Sansa to play a major part this season, but if we were going to stay absolutely faithful to the book, it was going to be very hard to do that." Brian Cogman echoed this, explaining that Sansa's Vale storyline simply wasn't substantial enough for a lead television character, so the show transferred Jane Poole's suffering to Sansa, along with significant embellishments, to manufacture importance. This is why I don't understand why people who enjoy the show seem to believe that the show's ending for Sansa has anything to do with the book ending. The showrunners have said that they changed Sansa's story so that she could be important in the show. That means that she wasn't important in the books. But I digress. Martin has been openly critical of this change. As he has explained repeatedly, Removing Jane Poole erased the fake Arya plotline, which in the books is politically explosive. The North fractured and mobilized because they believed Arya Stark had been returned to Winterfell and was being brutalized. That pressure threatens to break the Boltons. None of that happens in the show. When Sansa in Game of Thrones is married to Ramsay, the North barely reacts. They don't even show up to her wedding. There is no uprising, no slow burn resentment, no political consequences. The plot exists almost entirely to justify screen time for Sophie Turner rather than to adapt the story of Sansa Stark. The butterfly effect Martin warned about from as early as season 1 fully materializes here. So when Martin says he once intended to kill Sansa and might only reconsider because of her popularity, that isn't shocking. It's consistent. And even if Martin ultimately spares her, it is extremely unlikely that he will undermine the trajectories of his true leads, Jon, Arya, Bran, and Daenerys, to elevate a character who was never designed to carry that weight. That brings us to Jon Snow, the one place where Martin actually surprised me. In the same interview, Martin casually dropped what amounts to a spoiler. Here's what he said. "I'll decide this Tyrion chapter is not coming along. Let me write a Jon Snow chapter." That single line confirms something Martin had previously refused to clarify. Jon Snow has a POV chapter in The Winds of Winter, and that's pretty significant. At the end of A Dance with Dragons, Jon is stabbed repeatedly by members of the Night's Watch. When asked years ago why he killed Jon Snow, Martin famously replied, "Oh, you think he's dead, do you?" A deliberate dodge meant to keep Jon Snow's fate ambiguous and to encourage readers to argue about it until the next book. By confirming the existence of a Jon Snow POV chapter in The Winds of Winter, Martin has now made one thing clear. Jon's story continues. The question is no longer if, it's how. Catelyn Stark was murdered in her final POV chapter and later resurrected as Lady Stoneheart, yet she never received another POV. Her resurrection came with severe narrative consequences: loss of interiority, loss of humanity, and loss of voice. If Jon was simply resurrected in the same way, why would he retain a POV when she did not? If Jon simply survives the stabbing, that would be even more disappointing. His final moments in A Dance with Dragons are written to echo two of the most definitive deaths in the series, Robb and Catelyn at the Red Wedding. Robb's last words are fragmented and intimate. "Jane, Mother, Grey Wind." Catelyn's final thoughts spiral inward toward her children and Ned before she is brutally executed. Jon's final chapter mirrors that pattern exactly. "Ghost," he whispered, "stick them with the pointy end." The line "stick them with the pointy end" is symbolic of his relationship with Arya Stark. It's one of the last things she said to him in their last scene before they separated, when he gifted her with Needle. Martin has consistently tied that phrase to Arya in Jon's inner monologue, and like Robb calling for Grey Wind, Jon calls for his direwolf without prompting. The structure of A Dance with Dragons reinforces this. The novel opens with Varamir Sixskins' prologue, which exists almost entirely to teach the readers the mechanics of skin changing, specifically what happens when a skin changer dies. When the man's flesh dies, his spirit lives on inside the beast, until nothing of the man is left, and only the beast remains. We are shown that Orell continues to exist inside of his eagle, and that other skin changers can sense his presence. Varamir explicitly notes Jon Snow's strength as a warg and regrets not taking Ghost for himself. There would be a second life worthy of a king. That line is doing a lot of work. Taken together, the evidence strongly suggests this sequence. Jon dies. As he dies, his consciousness passes to the aptly named Ghost. Unlike Robb possibly entering Grey Wind, only to die again moments later when Grey Wind himself is killed, Ghost survives. Jon gets the second life worthy of a king inside of his direwolf, long enough for the consequences to take hold. This would solve the POV problem. A Jon Snow chapter doesn't require Jon Snow's body to be alive. It only requires Jon Snow's consciousness to exist. A POV chapter from inside Ghost, Jon's second life, would be fully consistent with the rules Martin has already established. It would also preserve Martin's commitment to consequences. Every resurrection he has written comes at a cost. Catelyn loses herself. Beric loses memories and identity. The show ignores this entirely when resurrecting Jon, with no meaningful psychological or spiritual fallout. Martin has been openly critical of that choice. If Jon is resurrected in the books, and I think he will be, it is extremely unlikely to be clean or immediate. Living inside of Ghost, losing time, losing pieces of himself, becoming more wolf than man before being pulled back into his body would be far more in line with Martin's themes and with the foreshadowing embedded in the text. The show turned resurrection into a reset button. The books have never done that. George R.R. Martin's January 2026 interview doesn't reveal a sudden change of heart or a dramatic shift in direction. What it does reaffirm, yet again, is that A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones are two separate canons, telling fundamentally different stories. The surprise isn't what Martin said. The surprise is that so many people still expected it to be otherwise. Tyrion was never meant to be rewarded. From the beginning, Martin described him as a villain, the greyest of the grey, a character whose intelligence and wit coexist with cruelty, entitlement, and moral rot. The show transformed Tyrion into a conscience for the narrative, softening and erasing the worst actions, and granting him power as a kind of moral absolution. Martin's statement that he sees no happy ending for Tyrion is not a reversal. It is a return to the character as written. Sansa's potential death is equally unsurprising. She was not created as a central protagonist with an arc of transformation comparable to Jon, Arya, Bran, or Dany. She was designed as a point of contrast, a source of internal conflict, and later as an observational lens for the political spaces. When the show wanted Sansa to remain important so that they could keep Sophie Turner on the cast, it had to give her another character's story entirely, which says it all. Jon Snow is the one place where Martin actually narrowed the field of possibilities. By confirming a Jon Snow POV chapter in The Winds of Winter, he confirmed that Jon's story continues, but not how. Ultimately, the interview doesn't tell us where the story ends. It reminds us how Martin tells stories, with consequences, with moral discomfort, and with a deep resistance to the kind of narrative wish fulfillment that defined the later seasons of the show. The books were never building toward a triumphant council, a sanitized villain, or an unearned coronation. They were always moving towards something harsher, stranger, and more honest. Thanks for listening to the Lore Weaver podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider following the show so you never miss new analysis, reviews, and deep dives. I would also love to hear your thoughts. Share your theories, reactions, or questions in the comments. Until next time, keep exploring the lore.